Hey, welcome back to Pappy Tinkers and part 4 of weathering the 65 wagon. I'm going to start off with some coarse texture gel that I picked up at Hobby Lobby in their artsy fartsy section. What this stuff is kind of like Elmer's glue that's got grit and texture to it. I spread this along the bottom in various places, and it's going to represent some of the bigger rust glomules, maybe some dirt clods from when our little boy went and did some lawn jobs, and just general junk that's underneath the car that's been on the road for 20 years. So I spread this stuff around in the frames and the nooks and the crannies. Not a whole lot, just enough so that the texture's there. And this comes in different grits. This one is coarse, but you can get finer grits for, maybe a different size of the car, different scales, or your military models. It can also be used in that, and I've used it as the gunk and dirt that goes in the tracks of military vehicles. It's really some good stuff. You ought to give this a try. While that's drying, I break out the Tamiya buff. Any light colored, creamy colored color will work, and as long as it's water based for this next step. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the cushion area of the seats with this stuff. This is a 20-year-old car, and it's had lots of use and abuse, and the seats are not going to be in perfect shape. So this is a new technique that I'm going to try out. We're going to get to the rest of that in just a second. I'll throw a little dash of this on the dashboard. And I think you're going to like what this stuff does. Like I said, this is a fun episode. Now we're going to get out the Folk Art Crackle Medium. Yes, this is that crackle paint stuff. Again, you find it at Hobby Lobby and in the craft paint section. So what I do is put this on some of that beige or foam colored areas that I painted before, and we let this dry. I can't explain how this stuff actually works, just that it does work. Oh, and while I've still got your attention, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't done so already. That'll keep you abreast of when the new stuff comes out, or whatever I'm doing. Okay, now let's get to the next section. I take some of my favorite reducer, and then I'll get some black paint. It can be the Createx, it can be Vallejo, or even the craft paints for this section. Or even a combination of all three, which is what this is going to be. So I take these along with some pigments, some rust pigments, and I'll start mixing them together on a palette. I used the pretty fair amount of reducer in it because I want to keep it thin. I'm not trying to actually cover anything. I'm just trying to shade it. You're not trying to turn it black, you're not trying to turn it orange, you just want different tints. When you look at something that's been rusted for a while, it may or may not have the exact same shade as it goes through it, especially on a vehicle, because different parts of the paint comes off at different times. So there's bound to be various shades within that rusted panel, even though it's all one roof or one hood. It's not going to be all just one particular shade. So as I'm doing this, I'll mix it around, and basically each brush stroke will have a little bit more orange or a little bit more black, or it might have some of the light colored rust or standard rust in it. and I just mix it all around. There's no rhyme or reason to this pattern. And what the pigments do at this point, besides adding more color, first off, you're locking it down with the paint that you're applying. And second, since it's actually got a little bit of texture to it, it helps create that texture that you're going to want that you're going to want to see and feel later on in this. Not a lot, just enough. Weathering a car is supposed to be subtle effects. A crash, that's big and sudden, but weathering takes time. So there's all kinds of little variations in it, and that's what I'm trying to do here. And this is actually fun. When was the last time you just smeared some paint over something and didn't care if it was all one color or not? Probably been a long time, maybe even since your first model. But anyways, that's what I do here, and I do the hood, and I do the tailgate and along the bottom. Any place where I think there might be some of the old stuff showing. You decide when enough is enough. When you can look it over and flip it around and say, yeah, that looks kind of realish to me. I think I'll go with that. That's when you know you're done. So now let's get this other color on the interior. I used a blue that's pretty similar to the shade that I already painted it, which was pretty common for the cars back in the 60s and even most in the 70s. The vinyl was one color and the cloth was a slightly different shade. It was usually a mixture of cloth and vinyl on the seats, with just a little bit of color variation between the two. Sometimes it was on purpose, sometimes it was just because it's different materials. I did thin the paint down just a little bit to help with the crackling action, so the paint stayed wet just a little bit longer. Now it's time for some of my favorite stuff. Tester's Old Blacker Doll Coat. We need a couple coats on this to help seal all that different colored in. And remember, there's some of the powders in it. This helps lock those rust powders down, or any other powders or shading that you'll want to use. Notice the frame off to the right a little bit. I accidentally cut out that video of me taking some of that rusty globby stuff, and I smeared it all over the bottom too. I left a little bit of the little factory blue overspray showing on the bottom, but we'll tone that down in a bit later. What I'm trying to do is get a couple nice coats on there for when we go to take off some of the primer and paint, for when that's showing. And I run into some problems that you'll see a little bit later. If you've seen the video of my shop flooding, well, I had an air hose on the ground and it was very, very humid, both inside the shop and outside. And yeah, something came back and kind of bit on me a little bit, which will show up here in just a few minutes. I also spray the doll coat on the inside because that'll tone down all that 20-year-old vinyl and give it, and take off that slightly satiny look and give it the doll sheen that 20 years of kids, french fries, groceries, and everything else can do to an interior. We made it look good, but you'll also get some glimpses of the what the crackling stuff did to the interior. That turned out pretty nice. It's not overstated, and it's probably not the best method, but it's pretty quick and pretty easy. For something with a convertible top, I would probably do it different, but for a convertible, this is fine. when I'm going to sand the dull coat, I like to put 2 or 3 coats on it. And that's what I'm trying to do here. And you'll start seeing some little funky spots showing up here and there. This is called blushing usually. And I'm trying to over wet it to try to get it to come out, and it's just not happening. All I'm doing is making it worse. I wanted the extra coats on it so that it would give me more protection on that next layer, but I think I just made it worse. But we're going to go with that and see what happens, see what I can do. You'll also notice that on the back of the wagon where I'd cut out the tailgate, I put it on the painting stand because I didn't want to get all the lacquer primer or lacquer thinner all over my hands, and I was going to keep my hands safe. And what it did was it stretched the body in back just enough to snap it off. So if you're cutting panels off, definitely keep that in mind when you go to try to mount it to paint somewhere. You don't want to stretch the body hardly at all. And even something simple that we're all so used to can just snap it like a twig. Well, here's how everything looks afterwards. I like the dashboard. I like the faded look. The interior, yeah, I could deal with that. That looks fine. But oh, look at this. At least I was finally smart enough to stop spraying. We're going to see what this ends up with in the end. I'm not going to try to dunk this. I think I'm just going to go from here and see what happens. You know what? This is an old beater. What's it going to hurt? Alright, now I know that this is part that some guys have been really waiting for. And there's a bunch of different methods to do this, and I'm going to show a couple here. I take a Scotch-Brite pad or some kind of scuff pad like this, and I'll dip it into just some regular plain old Elmer's glue. I try to get the scuff pad a little bit hairy, I guess is the best term for it, where it's kind of sticking out like a sponge. We're going to use the hood and I think the top of the fenders for this method. And you just dab a little bit here and there. Hit some of the places that you know there's going to be a couple little chips, like the front of the hood, around the edges or other highlights. Places where you normally see the rust on the hood. Definitely on the tops of the fenders, because my little teenage racer here, he's always bending over that hood, and his big old Confederate belt buckle just always chips the tops of his fender. Hopefully he'll learn to fix that before he gets the car repainted. There's also the hairspray method that some people like. But if you don't have hair, why buy hairspray? And sometimes I don't do any of this. I'll just sand through it. Sand through the primer to this part where I don't have the white blushing that looks oh so horrible. Maybe I'll turn that into, maybe there's just some rattle can spray paint our little teenager buddy got. Yeah. Okay. And I'm also going to show you the salt technique. Heavier salt works better than table salt, but don't grab the chef's fancy Himalayan pink rock salt. Chunkier is better, but table salt will work. And instead of water, I use rubbing alcohol because it dries faster. You're not trying to get the salt to dissolve, you just want it to dissolve enough to stick and stand up. Depending on the humidity of your place, and we know about the Florida humidity, water can take too long to dry. So the rubbing alcohol helps speed that along a little bit. And then you just lightly sprinkle, less sprinkles on the sides. except for maybe around the wheel wells. More on top, because that's where the sun does the most damage in the parts of the country that I've lived in anyways. So this is where we're going to leave this today, or for this episode, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope there's some things in here that you want to try out, and I hope you like and subscribe and come back and see me again. So, happy modeling from Pappy Tinkers.